All right, great. So we have a mixed set of questions. I prepared one or two, just to kick things off. But we also have, again, we have the mics over here if you want to ask any questions. And there are some questions that were asked in the link that we shared. So to get started, one question that I was curious about is, AMP is often seen as a way, so you all know this, AMP is often seen as a way to get quickly into the top stories carousel, right? But it seems like there's really a story around easier publishing and development. So do you think stories, for instance, and AMP for email and AMP in general are actually easier to build? I'm actually curious to hear your opinions on this.
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, do you think building for AMP is actually easier than building like a standard website? Or is it like well balanced?
I think each comes with its own challenge. So I think the sanitization part of the puzzle is pretty difficult because of what we've encountered with different CMS, and that is definitely an AMP-specific challenge. So I wouldn't say that AMP is easier to build for, but I think that it's probably equal. Everything is going to have its own challenge.
Okay, I guess we need to try harder.
Yeah, I think one thing I've been hearing is that while it's not necessarily easier to build, actually maintaining high performance and good quality over time is definitely easier if you, for example, integrate the AMP validator into continuous integration, and so ensuring compliance with best practices over time. Because I think what happens a lot is that you really invest in optimizing your experience, but then as like priorities change and maybe some other developer starts working on a project and they don't really know as much as what's going on, things regress. And so having this continuous like check that things are in good state, that's actually really helpful.
Great. Well, now I jumped around this document. Okay, I'm back again. So let's actually jump to the audience questions. So we actually have a few of them. I'm first going to ask some questions that we got through the Slido, I think it's called. The first question is, are there any plans to enhance the AMP story experience for desktop users to utilize increased screen real estate?
So it's definitely something that we are thinking about. It's a difficult problem because although you have more screen real estate, the content of the article or the content of the document is still the same, right? So having a much larger piece of screen real estate with a very short form content might create some awkward experiences. But we are working on, through some ideas, to allow publishers to sort of customize that experience and make sure that it is up to what you would hope for.
Great. Will all AMP platforms support or surface AMP stories? This is another question for you, I guess. For instance, supporting AMP enough to support AMP AMP stories. So yeah, I guess let me rephrase this question. I think it's about, like, do you think the places where AMP is currently supported will also support stories in a significant way?
So we actually put a bunch of thinking into that to make sure that AMP stories are actually just AMP documents. So anywhere that AMP documents are supported, in theory, could support AMP stories as well without doing any additional work.
Right, so you can like share them to Facebook or Twitter, and that just works. And obviously, it would be nice to have first-class support in one platform or the other. And we're kind of taking this one step at a time, and are excited to see what's ahead.
Right. So a lot of these. So I just noticed that most of these questions are about stories.
Perfect.
And so I want to give some others a chance to chime in here. Are there any other questions for the speakers in the non-story sessions? Anyone want to ask a question about animation or parallax? Or you're also shy? Okay, there's one here.
Hi. I just had a question about, it was more about in the Tasty demo, when you got to the bottom of the kind of feed, there was a button to load more content in that list. And I was wondering if there's a way to automatically load more content when you get to the bottom of the page. And it seemed kind of like you could do that with the animation stuff that you were talking about. But is there a way to do that right now? Or
Not currently, but for this quarter, we are actually working on infinite scrolling support for AMP lists, and that is the right way for us to support essentially infinite scrolling when you get to the bottom.
okay. Do you know when that would? Is there a timeline on that?
It's planned for this quarter,
Okay.
but there's not a lot of time left in this quarter, so soonish.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, then we just do another AMP stories question because they're very popular. Do you think that AMP stories could work with user-generated content on, let's say, a recipe platform, for instance? If so, what would you recommend to start with?
I mean, there's nothing that would prevent that. I think that it is a good idea, actually. You could, to get started, just try building the story statically, but there's nothing that would keep you from, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all HTML and CSS, right? So any way that you can use HTML and CSS with a normal web page, you could do to generate a story as well.
Great.
Can I add something from a user experience perspective? That sounds like a great idea, and the way the format is set up is that it lends itself really well to native videos as well as text, so I think recipes, having the text and showing a video is a really great execution for that type of content.
Cool. So this is another question for Xenia. And this is actually my question, because I was curious about this. So you're integrating stories into Arc, right? Your own in-house publishing system. Where would you like those stories to appear ideally? Like, what's the ideal way to surface them and integrate them with the rest of your site? And I've been curious about this.
For a lot of our clients, the AMP users come from organic search, so from the carousel. So I think it's very natural. The same way that they get to the AMP pages, they would get to the stories. Probably there would have to be a little bit more of a visual cue that you're not getting into an article, traditional article, but something more like an Instagram or Snapchat story. But I think it fits really well within the ecosystem.
Great. Do you have any more questions in the audience? So I think there's one here. No? Over here, yes.
Thank you. With the logical and maybe inevitable extension of AMP across screens and more discussion about AMP-only sites, are we looking at a fork of the web, and what are the implications of that?
Oh, I saw that question online on Twitter, I think.
So, no.
That's what I would have said, yes.
I think one of the important aspects to this matter is that it's just a JavaScript library that renders in the browser. The browser doesn't make any particular affordances for it, and it really doesn't particularly care about AMP. So, you know, the way I think we think about it is to create like a well-lit path to a good experience. But you know, if you don't want to use it and you want to, think you can do a better job, which you often can with the right investment, then more power to you. I think it's absolutely not a zero-sum game whatsoever, and we absolutely welcome people doing their own thing and using whatever they like.
Great.
Thank you.
And then I think we have a question over here.
How do you balance sanitization of content with preservation of editorial intent? Do you have metrics on how much content you end up removing to deliver AMP pages, and do you look in and see sort of what was removed?
This might be a question for Xenia. Huh?
Yeah, that's a difficult question about what you're sacrificing, right? You're either choosing for the story to not surface on the search at all, or you're choosing for the experience to be a little downgraded. And when you're handling thousands and thousands of stories, it'd be kind of hard to see the big picture and what is the right answer to that question. For one of our clients, there's one type of video embed that they just want to remove from all of their stories. So yeah, that definitely changes the AMP content, and that is a big problem for the user experience. Usually it's third-party integrations, like I've talked before, sports scores or horoscopes or election results and stuff like that. A lot of the time you have to build like a custom AMP solution for things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess, do you do anything to sort of quantify where you're at with it? In terms of like, you have a provider who has a rule that they know internally that if they use this, it's just not going to be there.
Right. Yeah, not at this point, but in the future, we have been asked to provide newsroom tools for validation as they're writing the story. So that choice is not, delegated to the developers, but rather the content creators. They can get alerted that, hey, this embed or this video might not be the best thing for AMP, and either the story won't surface or it gets stripped out, and then they can decide like what they want for each particular story. That is a way better solution because we have no way of really gauging what part of the content is really important as developers, but giving that power to the newsroom would be really great, and that's one of our next steps.
Great, thank you.
This shows the importance. I don't know, do you want to say something, Walter? But I mean, this shows the importance of how important it is for third parties to contribute to AMP. In fact, a lot of the contributions that we're getting are from third parties, let's say ad vendors who want their ads to be supported, like embeds. And the more we can get, the better. So we're actually very open to contributions that make these things work better and allow less exclusions for AMP.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's super interesting to hear the perspective that sanitization is a thing at all. Like, because in my head, why would you have that? Because we're obviously aiming to support all content that could possibly exist, and but obviously the reality is that if you have an existing publishing system and people, in the hardest case can actually copy paste arbitrary HTML into their content, then it'll be, it's a possibly untractable problem to do the best possible job. But like, I think it's our job to at least make sure that there's no fundamental limitations that you literally cannot support something, right? Even if you try really, really hard.
Great, cool, yeah. So next audience question then.
Hi, so my question is, when you started out AMP, it was accelerated mobile pages, and Andre kind of removed the mobile. It's all going to be about the web going forward, I assume. So initially, when it was mobile only, then most publishers took a stand as to the AMP version would have less content than the full desktop experience, obviously due to mobile limitations and all that stuff. But I think in the recent past, Google, you guys kind of came up with a recommendation warning publishers not to cloak content between the AMP and the full versions. So that's part one of my question. And part two is, if you have an existing kind of publication which you have millions of pages, is there any kind of tool or recommendation you have to migrate to AMP because you have an existing code base and something like a tool which would help you come up with a markup for migrating that content over to AMP? Yeah.
Who wants to take this?
I'll take the first part. If I understood it right, it was a question about the content parity message that, for example, this Google Search Console is offering if there's a parity mismatch. And I'm trying to channel the Google Search answer to this. This actually would be a really great question to ask at the Google booth over there, because there you'll find the actual experts. None of the people usually working on AMP are actually familiar with the search engine so much. But I think in this, like, if you just think from a user point of view, what it means for, you know, a search engine to surface the content, right? If you rank based on the canonical, but then there's a version of it that doesn't have all the stuff, then, you know, we probably want to show the one that has more content, right? And because in the end, it's about user experience, and so because we've observed that there sometimes is a mismatch, the console just surfaces this as something, you know, that you either fix, or, you know, if in the end it's a recommendation, it's up to you, but basically the search engine would choose not to link to the limited version if that's not the right thing for the user in that moment.
Yeah, that's a good answer. If I can add to that just one thing, the thing that really, like, when I thought about this for the first time as a user, I realized, okay, I actually don't think as AMP as something standalone. Actually, like, if I see a search result and I click on it, that's the website for me, right? That's basically the page that, for me as a user, that's the page I'm going to. If that's not complete and it has like a link, say, go to the full page, I'm like, this is weird. I just clicked on that page.
Does anyone recall the second part of the question?
Can you clarify maybe?
I think I just had to add to that. So as AMP doesn't have any limit to the content size or anything from an AMP.
Yeah. I think it was about like, does this actually mean that we should build more pages, more sites completely in AMP?
I was asking about the tool for migrating all non-AMP pages to AMP compliant markup.
Oh, okay. Tooling.
Oh yeah, in particular migration tooling. So, well, Barb, you founded a company for doing this. But I mean, obviously, it's actually a really hard problem to just convert arbitrary HTML to AMP, and it has limitations, right? So you can't, you know, as soon as you have, for example, you know, even like a menu, and you use some jQuery to implement it, it's very hard to detect that that's what you intended, and then, you know, converting that to something like AMP sidebar, right? So there's no super well-lit path. One thing that you know, we're definitely going to build sometime this year, and actually has a lot of solutions already, is what I call HTML snippet conversion. So more the task of I have a CMS and it stored the article content in HTML and in an unstructured fashion. And then having a good, really reliable tool to convert that to AMP is something that I think would be really useful, and almost everyone needs it, and it has been implemented many times. I think there's like 5 NPM modules for it. Obviously, WordPress has this built in, Drupal, etc. So getting that onto a more like uniform basis would be really helpful. But yeah, there's no magic answer, unfortunately, for saying like, here, press this button and you'll be happy.
Thank you.
Yeah, more audience questions? Yeah.
All right. Thank you for the presentation, especially about the parallax part. I wanted to address the question in that particular way. I think it's very interesting, and also all the animation kind of stuff, but I think it's still very technical, so knowing that the average journalist or designer out there will have a lot of trouble coming up with the CSS required. So my question would be, are you working on solutions to make it more non-coder friendly already, or is that rather in the far-off future? Because I know they are demanding it, and most of the times don't have the resources to support developers or to hire developers for that.
So our solution to that is essentially the AMP FX collection. The idea that we will provide an easy-to-use component that will have some built-in visual effects that is easily configurable. The idea that you find the element that you want and essentially add a few attributes on it, and it will get you the effect that you want. So you don't have to go to the low-level position observer or AMP animation to be able to create that. So we already have that, but only the parallax effect is currently in that collection. So we'll be adding more and more. And hopefully, as people come up with demand for this type of transition, this type of visual effect is important for us. Maybe people can contribute to that collection, or they can raise issues for us to include those.
Okay, thank you. I think one more. You want to add something, Abby, to this?
Yeah, definitely for stuff like that, file an issue, tell us what you're looking for. The more that we know that you want that and other people would use it too, that's really great.
Yeah. I mean, one more thing that I want to mention is that, yeah, no, I almost lost my point. But yeah, one other point that I have, which is not as informational as the other one, which is, remember those early 2000s, right? There's a lot of sites that had these snowflake effects, right? Like MIDI background, animated Christmas music, whatever. Can we have an AMP-FX particle effects that renders realistic particle effects, please?
Yes, I'm waiting for the pull request from you.
Okay, great. Cool. And then, sorry, actually, now I remember my point. So my actual point, and not a stupid joke. My actual point was that I think, goes to the other question that we just had. I think yes, one idea is to collection, but the other idea is that the way Washington Post has built tooling on top of the effects is something that I would like to see more often for these kind of things. So yes, it's true that journalists might not be able to write the actual HTML code in CSS, but I think the framework is fairly easy to convert into something that can be a visual tool, a visual GUI, I would say.
Yeah, I think the very technical answer is that, having something declarative is actually perfect for having a tool built on top, because you can both easily generate it, and you can, even if it's then manually edited, get as much information back, as opposed to having a Turing-complete programming language, which you can't really observe without running it to know what it does. This is actually not the case here, and super easy. And you could envision, for example, the WordPress plugin having an extra little toggle saying put a parallax on this, factor of 0.1. Building that tooling would actually be quite easy. Maybe too easy, and everything's going to move in crazy snowflake ways, but.
Okay, yeah. Time to move on to the next question. Does AMP, and this is kind of a more of a general question, but I think it relates to AMP as your website in an interesting way, because it becomes much more important. And the question is, does AMP support A and B testing, A/B testing of your website? And yes, how? What are the challenges for this to be dynamic? For instance, content served to the user based on his A/B tag.
I can answer this. Anyone else? So there is a component called AMP experiment, and basically with that you can define user groups based on you can use it for A/B testing by just saying half users go this way, half users go this way, or you can do whatever combinations you want, like have a 1% group here, a 1% control there, and 98% somewhere else, right? So that's all up to you. And basically the way it works is that it just adds a CSS class to your document based on that selection, and then it creates a variable that you can use in the analytics to then downstream make the metrics associated with the variant that was selected for the page. I think that's the long answer for saying yes. AMP-experiments.
Yes, absolutely. And then this is another AMP stories question, actually. So is there a timeline for ad support in AMP stories, and specifically DFP support?
I don't know the timeline for those things. We're currently investigating, we're experimenting with advertising in this format. We're going to probably start with publisher-served ads. So the same way that you would create, my example, if you remember from my talk, was the 5 most expensive cities. The same way you would create one of those pages for a city, you could create a page for an advertisement, and you can control that yourself and handle the advertising yourself. But we're working on sort of dynamically or programmatic ads support and trying to figure out all of the complexities involved with that. No timeline as of yet.
Great. And then I would say the final question, unless we have more audience questions after that one, and then we can release you early to lunch, is what about user-generated content on AMP? We are having an AMP to show the results, but most of our content is user-generated content, and we still need that. I mean, we had a variation of that question earlier, I guess, but yeah, I think the story is the same, right? You just have to sanitize in a certain way.
Yeah, but user-generated content can be all kinds of stuff, right? So if someone uploaded a photo, like sure you can, render that to an AMP page, obviously. It could be that they uploaded HTML. It's not that common unless you have a blogging platform. So I think in the most common use cases, it would be, I couldn't see how it would actually be even a challenge to support it.
Yeah, I think the only real issue would be if, like you said, like some of those form editors support like pasting HTML into them, and yes, if it's arbitrary HTML, that might be tricky. But yeah, I think the way I would answer this is to say I shouldn't even be answering all these questions, but it's just making sure that whatever form or tool you're building to submit that user-generated content doesn't allow you to go off the rails. Okay, do we have one more question? If not, yes.
Do one more question. There was a great question there about multivariate testing, and I was wondering about other capabilities that are often supplied by third-party JavaScript components, of those capabilities that you'd normally see in typical e-commerce publishing sites. What is the most requested features that are missing from AMP today, and what are you prioritizing for working on next?
I think this is a better question for tomorrow almost, because we'll have a panel on e-commerce, but we can try at least.
Yeah, I mean, it would be even better if we had like a product manager on stage. So it's like their bread and butter. So you should definitely check out the talk we had that Rudy and I am doing tonight. That has like our roadmap laid out, which is the indirect answer to your question of what's missing. I would absolutely actually declare us as pretty feature complete for the publishing space in many ways. In the e-commerce side, there's certainly, if any, bigger holes. And so it's there's no one answer because it really kind of depends on what kind of vertical you're in, yeah, that's I think the rough answer.
Great. I think we can close at that point. Thank you very much for. Yes, one more question. All right.
Gil from Airbnb.
Yes.
When are you going to implement built-in split traffic testing to test between AMP and canonical?
Built-in switch traffic testing to build
split traffic.
Split traffic between AMP and canonical.
Yeah.
So I would like this to be a feature in Search Console, or you can say like, send some traffic here, some traffic there, but that feature doesn't exist, and I don't think there's any plans to do it, but it would be nice. For now, the best you can do is that you publish parts of your pages in one way, parts of your pages in the other way, and then try to make an assessment over that. Obviously, from a soundness of the experiment, you run into issues because they're not the exact same pages, and this traffic isn't exactly the same. But that's, I think, right now the best you can do.
Right. Yeah, we've been trying to measure conversions impact for probably 6 months now. Still unable to do it.
Yeah, that should probably work. You definitely want to, if you saw the keynote, you want to install that Google Analytics fix.
Yeah, we did that.
Right. That's very important. I do think that specifically for this case, if you are using it for AdWords, you can use the existing experiment setups in AdWords. So for example, run your AMP campaign versus your non-AMP campaign and directly, and also very statistically sound compare conversion rates.
Yeah, we don't do AdWords, just search engine results. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to all the morning speakers. Please give a big round of applause. And